Third-party measurement is really important because it is honest. If you look at the marketing ecosystem today, the way this currently works is you have a really brilliant creative agency that's working with the brand. The creative is created, then the brand pays their agency, their media agency, to start distributing that creative across different channels. And the main problem is that the majority of that data collection actually happens at the level of the distribution channel. So essentially, in other words, that means that if you're, let's say, what's a big brand in Germany? Volkswagen. And you want to push, let's say, a creative piece of advertising across 10 different distribution channels, including the New York Times and maybe Facebook and maybe BuzzFeed. You're basically allowing the New York Times, BuzzFeed, and Facebook to self-report on their own performance, which essentially means you're letting them grade their own homework. So by the time that data gets back to you, it's all in different formats, it comes at different times, and it's all telling you how great of a job you've done, because essentially it's in the interest of all these distribution channels for you to keep spending money with them. So I think a really fundamental way we could change it is for brands to ask third-party independent data collectors to measure and police all distribution channels for them. Third-party measurement is really important because it is honest. It's not just anyone who can call themselves a third party, because the majority of the data companies out there today are monetizing from all sides of the table. So if you're a data company like Knotch and 80% of our revenue comes from distribution channels, and now I turn around to a brand and say, I will measure your distribution channels and tell you when they're not doing well, obviously your incentive structure is not to do that. So I actually think brands should be really careful with who they work with and who they trust to give them an actual assessment of what's going on. Let's assume that we're living in this new world, and all of a sudden we have really good data sets that we trust, that are transparent, that are sourced the right way. I think once you have that, it's really important for a brand to understand that owning this data for themselves is really key to them becoming a digital-first brand, which seems to be every brand's obsession now. Everyone I talk to, at least in New York, says, I want to go direct with my audience, right? And I think a lot of them are creating content to achieve that direct connection. So I think the best way to start using this data is first to bring it all in-house and start combining this data from your content efforts with the data that you already have about your audience. Because I think true intelligence and wisdom can happen when you're starting to combine first-party data sets that can tell you more than just here's how people felt about this content piece or here's who saw it. You can start looking at, in the example of Volkswagen, here's who bought a car, here's where they are, here's their demographic data, and here's how they responded to this new advertising that's aimed at changing their perception of our brand. And so I think that having that full holistic picture of a human and of an audience is really important. I think the most important takeaway is for brands to understand how important first-party data versus third-party data is. And look, when I talk about this, I realize that first of all, I'm such a data nerd, so I tend to want to babble on about first-party and second-party and third-party and just use all these technical terms. But at the end of the day, all these things have a really easy-to-understand real-life analogy. So in this case, it's a difference between having a direct conversation with someone versus talking to someone who's telling you how the conversation with someone else went. And so fundamentally, if you're trying to build a brand that's going to go direct with their audience and really have a future in the digital landscape, the importance of that first-party data, aka the direct communication, is fundamentally important. And as long as brands will continue to accept for someone else to gather the data that underlines their audience's feedback to their brand, they're going to be incapable of talking back to their audience in a way that they should in real time and essentially meeting them with content that they want. How can brands become owners of the data? I think the most important part is understanding that they actually are paying for all of us to be in business. And so I believe that they have the right to demand that all of the channels that are accepting their media dollars should also accept their own independent data collection pixel. And so I think the dynamic there has less to do with technology. The technology is already there. and more to do with marketers just becoming more bullish about pushing their distribution channels to accept independent measurement. I strongly believe that the future of advertising in general is going to belong more to the brand, because I see brands bringing a lot of strategic functions internally and agencies slowly starting to lose their grasp on a lot of these. So I think naturally data is going to be owned by the brand. A lot of the software that's currently being built in our industry is going to sort of be built for brands, to go into brands and help them manage their data. And so that being said, I think if a brand can then own the data that comes from all of their media efforts, combine that data with all the data that they already have, and then also own the creative aspect as well as the distribution aspect, I think it's going to be a really beautifully integrated marketing stack that will enable brands to really go direct. And so I think the future, I would be worried if I were an agency. I'd be worried if I were a really commoditized technology that doesn't work with brands. And if I were a brand, I'd probably be worried about being able to keep on top of all of the technology innovation.